Now, someone asked me, this is a good thing. A neighbor was asking this one when we were talking about a recent pilgrimage. He said, did any universally recognized halachic authority, I'm going to use the acronym URHA for that one, universally recognized halachic authority, advocate going to Temple Mount or tell you could go? He tried to pull a shtick. He says, this Rav, who you respect, by the way, he mentioned Rav Cloney, who's a very well-known figure, says, what does he say about going to the Temple Mount? You ever ask him? And I said, you know what? We're going to go ask him. There was another guy there also. Yeah, we're all going to go. We'll go to him on Chol Moed and tell him what we plan to do and see what he says. Because I told him, as far as I know, I've been telling you what I've been up to for years, and he's been winking and nodding. And I know his father-in-law, who was quite a well-learned individual, was down with Rabbi Bar-Hayim, and I can't imagine why he wouldn't go. And it turns out we went to speak to him on Chol Moed, Sukkot, and he says, yeah, his father-in-law, of course, was Havada. He was going in the 80s when it was basically dangerous to go. And he himself is much more neutral on the subject, but he's not saying no to anybody, as you could see, and he doesn't have opposition. This guy thought he had gotten me. He says, so and so. If you ask him, he'd be opposed. No, he's not opposed. What about universally recognized halachic authority? So the response is quite complicated. The first one is no one is universal. There is no such thing as a universal halachic authority. Even great men like the Shulchan Aruch are not universal, unfortunately. But then again, there hasn't been anybody universal since the end of the Babylonian Talmud, since Ravina Ravashi, like the Rambam points out. When Rambam says that line, by the way, everybody accepted the Talmud Bavli, and it binds all Jews. He's not saying the Bavli is the last word. He's saying even the Bavli, because the Rambam mentions four sources of the Torah Shebaal Peh: the Mishnah, the Tosefta, and by the way, also the Medrash Halacha, and the Bavli and the Yerushalmi. And when he says, and the Bavli binds everybody, he means saying the Bavli is the last word of these authoritative sources. And the Rambam is not saying Bavli beats Yerushalmi and Bavli beats everything. The Rambam is saying Bavli in, but things after Bavli not. For example, Masechta Katanas, like Sofrim, for example. Masechta Sofrim is full of many practices. By the way, if you're insisting we should do things like Masechta Sofrim when it comes to Kiddush Levana, then I ask you to read the parak right before that. No one's doing a mock funeral for a Sefer Torah on Tisha B'Av like they used to. Have you seen those things? There's a lot of... Yeah, okay. Everybody knows the one line that was brought by Talmidei Rabbeinu Yonah and others that, that lingered, but Masechta Sofrim and the other Masechta Katanas are sources of practice and halacha, but they're not universally binding. And you'll find that many of the halachas that you could derive from them, for example, do not show up in the Rambam or the Rif, or even in the Rush. And there's a reason for that, because those weren't a reflection of universal halacha. So universal halacha or halachic authority is not something that we've had since basically the end of Chazal. Next, no one has been universal, even Maimonides and Beis Yosef. No one is universal, and no one has been universal. And the day one of the men that had been told is such a man, okay, or someone like this, let's say you're Rav El Yashiv, who had a big PR machine behind him, okay, universally recognized local authority, which is the kind he's trying to allude to. The day a person does advocate for going to the temple, then he will no longer be a universally recognized local authority. It's a no true Scotsman thing. He will lose his approval. Who this happened to? Rabbi Soloveitchik. Rabbi Soloveitchik was 100% on the track for godless. Even when he was a young man, even he was at the top of his game at the end of World War II. He had already taken over his father's position at YU. He was the Rav in Boston, well-known Agudist family. But what happened was that he realized the mistake of the militant anti-Zionism that characterized rabbinic politics in Europe and in the West, and even in Palestine, leading up to World War II. The whole discouragement of Aliyah and the founding of a state led to what? Many Jews losing their lives. Rabbi Soloveitchik realized this and dropped his political affiliations and became head of the Mizrahi, of all things. Even Rav Kook didn't join the Mizrahi. So that was a big deal. And what did Rabbi Soloveitchik do every Yom Ha'atzmaut? He gave his big landmark annual address. Okay, his open to the public shiur of the big shiur of every year was when Yom Ha'atzmaut, and that's when he spoke about these issues. And many books were composed on this. They became his most well-known books outside of Halachic Man and the Man of what is it? The Lonely Man of Faith. You guys have read these? Required reading. Rabbi Soloveitchik's works are required reading. Once you read them, when you're in the airport and when you're on the plane. That's when I got to read these when I was your age, traveling back and forth. So it was good. I remember I had with me what became was it Fate and Destiny, the 5 drushas, Halachic Man I've saved for my son. Okay, and what was it else? And of course some more Nevuchim, which some other guys on the plane coming back from Eretz Yisrael, guys with hats, told me, "Oh, Rosh Hashiva said you're not allowed to read that." I said, "Oh, good. I'm good. 10,000 years ago, they were saying the same thing about more Nevuchim. You know how well that worked out for them. So you should be reading these things." And Rabbi Soloveitchik basically wrote about the mistakes that they had made politically, and that basically did it for him. He was no longer considered big, even though he was the greatest. That when he was younger, it was like his father said. His father declared upon arriving in New York, they asked him if he had any goals in mind, specifically taking up the mantle as Rosh Hashiva and Yeshivas Rabbeinu Yitzchak Hanan. And he said, "Not really. I don't have much to do. My son Joseph is already the world's greatest Talmud scholar." So there's that's how well he thought, and you could see what people thought and wrote about Rabbi Soloveitchik before his big Zionist turn. He was tops. Rav Kook said about Rabbi Soloveitchik that Rav Chaim is basically living on in the grandson. Okay, Rav Chaim's intellectual heir. That was Rabbi Soloveitchik, but his he joined in the wrong crowds, and then he wasn't gadol enough for everybody, so he had to be stripped of these titles, and he had to be basically expunged from the record, Stalin style. So that's about godless. So no, you're not gonna have this. And if you had such a person who believes in this, if you are, let's say, a Rabbi Rabinovich, and you're advocating for these things, so you are not by definition a gadol anymore. So no, you're not universally recognized halachic authority. And it's we should actually, in light of things that we've seen in the last few years, I'd be wary of authorities. Okay, telling yourself universally recognized authority, somebody who claims too much authority and therefore listen to me, is a little bit weak, especially taking advantage of rabbis. There's some major rabbis who are taken advantage of by the system, who have, you could see this, it's well documented, advocating for people to do things that perhaps they should not have done, medically risky things. And you know what I'm talking about. And there you go. So yeah, it's just not going to happen. The day someone does such thing, it's not going to be there. So I'm not holding my breath, waiting for universally recognized local authority, and I don't think anybody else should either. So some people have a cultural affinity. The fact that someone says this, let's say the fellow, my neighbor, hi, the fact that he would tell me that he himself is waiting for universally recognized local authority is more like him saying that he feels that he needs to toe the line. He's doing a good job repeating what he has been taught to repeat. It has to be one of our people. And okay, so he wants to be kept culturally in line. That's fine. But it might not be what God wants. And at least he should take some time to study this Mishnayos. He actually sent me some Mishnah. It was funny. Okay. And I hope and I pray that, especially with regards to these things, I think that there's nothing more important today than this whole Temple Mount issue. Why? The issue of the temple is like in Rabbi Soloveitchik's time, Aliyah, okay? Mass Jewish immigration to the land of Israel leading up to World War II, and the founding of the state were very important at the time, and they could have saved Am Yisrael, and they didn't happen when they were supposed to, and we paid the price. And now we're sitting in a similar situation where it is clear that the Torah tells us to do something, and there's major rabbinic opposition to it. And we basically are back in 1922. This is the issue of today, and we have to make it happen. Because if we don't make it happen, we don't want it to know. I was just saying that this Temple Mount issue is the Aliyah of today. Just like in 1922, it would have been better if the Jews had focused on escaping Europe and founding a state in order to take in all the eventual refugees, and it came to a crescendo in World War II. So too, I believe today that this is our challenge. We have to focus on rebuilding the temple and rebuilding Jewish society in the land of Israel. That is that is what's going to save us. And if we do not focus on this, and instead we actually use halachic or pseudo quasi halachic justifications for ignoring these issues, we stand to pay a very hefty price. Okay, that's why it's very important. And why should you even bother? There's major rabbinic figures who are against this. There's rabbinic organizations that are against it. The Rabbanut itself, the Aguda and the Rabbanut are shaking hands on this one. They're going to the Temple Mount, and the answer is they're wrong, and they're completely oblivious to the lessons of history in this respect. And that's what Rabbi Soloveitchik would say, which is why Rabbi Soloveitchik's intellectually honest students have gone public with this. Rav Tendler himself was on Har Bayis many times. He said things like similarly. He was a very astute man. It's been reported that Rav Shechter, who the only reason why he hasn't gone is because he doesn't want to step on the Rabbanut's feet, but has admitted that if Rabbi Soloveitchik were around today, he'd also point out that going to the Temple Mount is technically mutter, perhaps the right thing to do, just like Rabbi Soloveitchik wrote about in his well-known essays and spoke about in his well-known speeches. And this is also a matter of public record. So I hope that everybody join us. I think that there's no better time than Hanukkah for us to learn these lessons.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.